Yes, hello everyone, I'm Nils Grandelius and I will today talk about my game against Magnus Carlsen from the recently finished Norway Chess tournament in Stavanger. The game was in round number 3. In the first round I lost with black against Kramnik, and in the second round barely made a draw with Aronian. And now it was time to face Magnus. I mean, after being on half out of 2 with black, so it's quite a tough spot to be in. But instead of trying to, let's say, play a bit safer and perhaps managing to get a draw in some long, boring line of the Berlin or something, I decided to spice things up a bit and try to get a game that was maybe not that sound, but at least very interesting. So he played e4 as expected, which he tends to do when facing lower rated players. And here I play normally e5, which I did later in the tournament against Veselin Topalov. But for this game I had prepared to play c5, knight f3, and now this very unusual move, knight f6. Normally I played the dragon variation or the Najdorf, both very sharp Sicilians, both I think very well suited for this game in particular. So you might wonder why I didn't choose to play this for the game, and the reason is simply that here instead of d4, Magnus usually plays bishop b5 check when the character of the game becomes much less forcing and much more positional. Actually, much more like the normal Spanish, which I was trying to avoid by my first move. So I mean, in keeping in line with my intentions before the game, I had to play knight f6 here, or not had to, but that was the idea. Because now we get, after knight c3, for example, which I've faced twice against Adams and Hare Krishna in different tournaments. I played d5 against Adams, which is quite messy and very risky. But I also have the option of playing d6. And now white should play d4, and we get the Sicilian, but with having avoided bishop b5 check. So this was my cunning plan. Unfortunately, white has a better move here, and it's e5, which is also the main line. Knight d5 and knight c3. And here it is possible to play e6, but it's considered very dubious in view of takes and d4, and white is supposed to have a clear edge. But knight takes c3 was my idea. And here, if he takes with the b pawn, I will just play d6 and trade this pawn, and I will more or less equalize the game immediately. So d takes c is the main move, knight c6. And here basically white has 2 different plans at his disposal. The one most common and the one chosen by Magnus is to play bishop f4 with the idea to go queen d2 and long castle. And then the positional basis or foundation of this idea is that he has those 4 pawns in front of his king, which makes the king very secure and very difficult to attack. The other idea here for white is to play a move like bishop c4, and after e6 to put the king on the king side. And here the idea would be that the king is a bit safer. There will be no king side attack, but you can exert pressure on the d file with moves like queen d2 and rook a d1. This has also been tried quite a lot, but here a very interesting idea for black is to castle long instead and then push the pawns on the king side, which again with the kind of unclear play that I was looking for in this game. But Magnus, as expected, went bishop f4, and here comes a very interesting subtlety. If black plays normally with e6, queen d2, bishop e7, for example, white goes long castle. And now, in order to open up in front of the white king, I have to go a6, b5, and then b4. But when I've done all that, white just simply answers c4. And the position is still blocked. And if I start by playing c4, I don't know, let's say something like this. Let's say this. If I start by c4 and then b4, the pawn on c4 will be hanging. and also it's very slow. So here, in order to be able to play such style of play with black, you have to play this queen b6 move. And the idea is that either white replies rook b1, and then he no longer has the option of castling long. So now I just return to c7 with the queen and play my idea of e6, b6, bishop b7, and long castle. Or he plays b3, and then when we reach similar, similar kind of position, let's say something like this, a6, h4, b5, I'm much quicker in opening up the position because I have this hook on b3 to attack, gaining 1 or 2 tempos at least. So that is the idea behind queen b6 followed by queen c7. It looks like it loses a tempo, but in fact it's quite smart. However, there is a big problem which I didn't know before the game, and that is what Magnus did, queen c1. Now this is in some sense very smart, because he avoids both rook b1, so he still has the option of castling long, but he also avoids the weakness with b3. So were I to go back to c7, for example, then he simply goes queen d2, and I have the position which I was trying to avoid. And if I go e6, he has another very interesting way of playing, which is knight d2, making use of the square. And then the knight can come to c4 or e4, and I will lose additional time with the queen. And for example, if I go something like this, I think, as soon as I play b6 or b5, he will go knight d6, and something like this is very good for white, because the dark squares on the king side are too weak. Like queen e3 to g3, for example, is a very dangerous plan. So my idea is to keep this dark squared bishop, and that's already put me in quite a difficult situation, because all normal moves seems to be just bad, and I have to come up with something else. I've seen, after the game, I saw this queen c move that it had been played, and d5 was quite a common response. But in fact, after simple trade on d6, queen e3, and long castle, white gets exactly what he wants. Again, those 4 pawns in front of the king makes the king very safe, and if black would castle short, apart from the fact that this pawn is hanging, there is also a huge attack, just h4, h5, and followed by knight g5 and so on, something like this, and this, maybe queen e4. It's I simply have no pieces on the king side. I will be mated within 10 moves here, most likely. So I have to do something else. I can try to play h6, but he will just go h4, and this doesn't change a lot. If d5, it's maybe even worse, because I have this weakness on h6, and if e6, still knight d2 is very strong. The dark squares are still weak, particularly the g7 pawn. So after a thorough investigation, I decided to play the move f6, which looks ridiculous. I'm first moving my queen here, and then I'm going f6, intending to play g5, without developing any pieces at all. But the idea is that the queen is no longer on the d file. It no longer has the possibility of entering the game, because it has to protect b2. And if he is to develop his pieces normally, like he did in the game, then g5 and g4, and this pawn on e5 is very weak. So I get some immediate counterplay in the center before he has time to castle. And were he to play h4, I can just trade everything, and I even have I don't need it, but if I want to, I even have this move queen e6 followed by d6, and then I can trade the queens, and the ending is more or less equal. So there is some, and if white is to take, then I can take with the g pawn. And now my idea is simply to take control over the center with e5 followed by d5, and in the long run my king can come to safety on the queen side. For example, something like this. And here, if white wants to, he can move the knight and give me a check, but it turns out it's not so dangerous, because I will just go rook d8 and king c8 anyway, and the king is safe. and my center is quite important. So so white has to do something more more powerful than just simply developing. And he came up with a very interesting idea. It should be said that Queen C1 was played after quite some thought, so it's quite likely that it was not a prepared option. So after thinking for a long time, he went bishop c4. My only reasonable move is to play g5, because that was the idea. Bishop g3. Actually, okay, so here I went g4, and now he sacrificed the piece with e takes f6, which we will return to. But already in this position, he can do a similar sacrifice by taking here. And after takes, queen takes f4. It looks like the knight on f3 is more valuable than the bishop on g3, which he has in the game. But the problem here is that when I do like I did in the game with knight a5, I'm threatening to take, and I am also threatening the bishop. So in the game he had a very nice option of going f7, king d8, bishop d5. And somehow I was stuck, because the move I wanted to play, queen f6, imagine the bishop here instead of the knight here, then there would be possible to deliver mate on c7. So it seems if he sacrifices the piece in this way, this knight a5 move is quite strong. Probably white has enough compensation for a perpetual or something like that, but he's definitely not better. So he goes bishop g3 instead. I have to continue with g4. Now, were it to move the knight, I will take with the knight on e5, forcing him to take. And even though he can win this pawn back, for example, like this, then I mean, I'm safe. My king will come to c7 again if he gives me a check on h5, and I have the bishop here, and I have a strong center, and I think actually I'm just better here. And he can perhaps try to play with pawn down for some compensation, but it's also not very impressive. So he needs to sacrifice the piece, which he did. So he took. I have no choice, of course. And here, queen f4. Okay, I should take the pawn. There is no reason not to, and rook g1. This is probably the most critical point in the whole game, and also a very fascinating position to analyze. White has sacrificed the piece for currently one pawn. Actually, no pawns at the moment, but it will soon be one when he picks up the g2 pawn. But his idea is that I'm very underdeveloped. I have a long time before I can get my king into safety, and he has very easy development. Next move he can castle long. Everything will go to the center. 2 open files towards my king. I mean, both the bishops are very active, and the queen is very strong on f4. And I have I have a very difficult job of actually, getting out at all. So what I have to do is I have to try to develop, but it's very difficult to achieve. What I did in the game was that I played this knight a5 move, which is it has some logic, because I'm threatening this and I'm threatening this, and we will return to the negative sides of that move. Other options are actually the main option, which is a very surprising move. It is to play the move h5, and it looks like madness because I'm opening up my position even more, and I'm not developing anything. But the idea is that I will stop him from going long castle, because now I have bishop h6. And if I stop long castle, it's not clear where he will put his king. He can, if he wants to, he can take on e7. And after bishop takes e7, he can now castle long. But now I managed to get rid of this very important pawn that was on f6, that later went to f7 and almost promoted. Still, it's not that easy for me to make a move here. For example, if I try to develop with d6, he can just go rook h e1, and the next move he will take here, or actually he can also just sacrifice on e7, and I'm simply not in time to castle and not in time to get out. So here I do have another very strong move, and probably quite surprising as well. And it is the same idea, that I want to somehow kick this queen away and at the same time defend. So I have the surprising move knight d8. Now if he is to play something like this, I have queen h6. And if I manage to trade queens, I will be just a piece up. Here white can, for example, if he wants to, he can sacrifice and give a check here. Bishop g5 stops the trade of queens, and here white is a rook down but has tremendous compensation. And at the very least he can play bishop f6, queen h6 and bishop g5. But if he is more ambitious, looking for more, there are other moves, like he can even play king b1, I think, just threatening bishop f6 and queen e4. But black is not without chances. I mean, the knight can come to e6, not immediately because I will be mated like this. But for example, if I start by rook f8, after queen e3, now I can play. Let me see. Yeah, I can play like this, I think. Takes and takes, and I can just run away, I think. And then so in this position it's quite important also that my pawn is still on g2, because I can deliver mate on the next move. But this is a way of playing. Instead of knight d8, I also have an option of playing king d8, which also looks ridiculous. But the idea is that I'm getting out of this check. So for example, if you were to play something like this, I can play h4. And now we cannot get away with the bishop by check and bishop f4, because my king is already moved. And here it seems like I survive. Also takes here. h4 is okay for black. Takes, and now it's not possible to take with the rook because there is mate. But after bishop takes, check, I can take. He will take intermediate move here, king c7, takes. But next move I can develop my bishop, and I still have my piece up. Such a position is not that clear still, because the h pawn is dangerous, but black shouldn't be worse, at least. So after h5, like what he did in the game with f7 is just a much worse version, because he still cannot castle, and the knight on c6 is much better than it was on a5. And what else? If he takes and takes immediately, it's again, I have the option of knight d8, and I also have the option of h4, and both looks like black is surviving. So it seems this h5 move, which, I mean, to my surprise, it seems like it actually holds the position together for black. But not at all that black is better. If something like this and knight d8, I mean, for example, we saw that white could get a draw by rook e1 and takes on e7. But he can also, if he wants to, he can play other moves, like I think even this, and after knight e6 there is f4 followed by f5, and I mean, it's very unclear, and white can definitely play on if he wants to. But objectively speaking, it seems like black is actually surviving here. And it's also the the kind of position that I was aiming for in the game. I wanted something very unorthodox, something very random, to put it bluntly. I mean, and something that I mean, this classical knowledge that he possesses and all his experience doesn't matter too much, because he will anyway not have seen any position like this before. The only problem being that that it's extremely difficult for black to play this, which also showed on the next move, because here I went knight a5, which to my, I mean, when I was calculating this position over the board, my line of thought was, does knight a5 work or does it not? If it works, I should definitely play it, because it's the most logical move, and it's really the move you would like to play, because it clears up the situation. I didn't really ask myself, do I want to play it? Just, can I or can I not? And I concluded that I could, which turned out to be wrong, but it's very, very, very deep why it doesn't work, because in this position the computers actually give me an edge. But I was calculating quite deeply, and Magnus as well. Actually, he played f7 first, that, of course, because otherwise I can take. So f7, king d8, bishop d5. And now we have this problem of queen f6, queen c7 mate. But I have a piece up. There are no immediate threats. Actually, queen e5 could be called a threat, but after a natural move like d6, there are no threats. And I mean, things shouldn't be so bad. But it turns out that white has this idea of taking on g2, moving the bishop, and then going rook g8. And I have 3 moves, but I have no way of stopping it, it seems. Because this pawn on f7 is worth at least a piece here. So in this, I mean, of course d6 is the move to play, and it's the most logical way, and I was also close to just playing it, but when I started to calculate, I saw some really ugly things. I was thinking that you will have to castle. Let's see. h5. Now I'm threatening bishop h6, so bishop h4, king c7, takes, bishop c8, bishop h3, and now this, allowing me to play bishop h6, but the problem is that he can just take, and take here, and the pawn again. This time it's worth not a piece, but rather a queen, because he cannot stop it from promoting. If I don't play h5, I can play king c7 immediately, but he just takes. Bishop h3, he just goes back, and again the problem is bishop h4, rook g8. It's very, very hard to stop, and you can have a bit of fun here with white. For example, if black goes here, threatens mating 1 on b2, b3 is the only move, knight e5, and here actually it's possible to win in quite a few different ways. But I think quite a nice way of showing just how good the white position is to take this knight. D takes E, takes. Now if this, then just rook g8 again. The pawn worth a queen, more or less. I'm just a queen down. I'm just a queen up, but I have absolutely no defense. And if this, then there is a very surprising option of just giving the almost queen away. And after takes, check, here, just take with the rook. Now I have a queen for a bishop, but I'm just completely lost, because the pawn here will be falling, and my king is just It's just stuck. I mean, after queen b5, I think you can even play a move like c4. And as soon as I move, he will take and move the rook somewhere here, for example, and it's mate. So I mean, even this position is just completely lost. Just winning immediately. So actually, I don't think I saw queen takes e5 during the game, but another move like queen h4 and followed by taking on e5 and rook g8 is just very good for white as well, almost as good as queen takes e5. So actually, it seems like the computers, they didn't really understand just how dangerous the position was, therefore saying that I was equal. But I considered my position was very bad, and therefore I had after d6, therefore I had to try to look for an option. And then I saw this idea of trying to stop white from castling long. Not with h5 this time, but because there is no need, but because I can play bishop h6 immediately, I thought. Because it's not at all the same if the white king is also in danger in all those lines. Like, it's very important that for white that his king is safe on c1 or b1. With the king still in the center, there are always counter-attacking possibilities. But here it's more concrete, because he goes queen e5. Still queen f6, queen c7 mate. So rook f8 is the only move. But now, if I'm allowed, I will play d6 and be okay. But I have created a new weakness for myself by moving the bishop, and it's this pawn on e7, which is possible to attack. So bishop h4. And now my idea was to play knight c6. He has to take it. I cannot take back because e7 is hanging. It's just mate in one move. So my idea was to take on f7. And now I thought if he moves the bishop, for example, there, then d6. And I'm in time to get out. But unfortunately, I forgot that after this intermediate move, rook takes g8, I can still not take here because check, bishop f8, and now it's probably quite good to take here, but here at least I'm fighting on. But even better is to take immediately on e7 and takes here. Yeah, rook e8 and I'm checkmated. So this rook takes g2 was a major point. The problem, of course, being that in this position the move I wanted to play didn't work, so I had to come up with something else. Still, I should have tried d6 and tried to find some way of making it more unclear later. But bishop h6, this, and as I realized by now that knight c6 doesn't work, I'm just getting mated. I had to give an exchange like this. Bishop takes, and now knight c6. Because now if rook takes, I'm in time to take the queen, and the king has this square. Still, material-wise, it's not that bad. I have one pawn for the exchange, but b2 is also hanging. And this pawn is still alive, actually, even though he can win it. I was very much expecting him to play queen h8 in order after king c7 to guard this pawn. For example, rook b1. And the game continues, but most likely it's very good for white. Like d6 takes, and okay, I can try something like this if I want to, but white is an exchange up, and there is no clear compensation. But it should, the black position should actually not be underestimated. For example, another natural move to guard this pawn is to play b3. But if he is to play b3, I go d6, and if he takes, I go queen a5, and it turns out that this pawn is actually quite weak. He's threatening, or I am threatening to play next move knight e5, blocking the queen from the protection of the pawn, and also threatening the bishop. And if he is to play something like king f1, so that the pawn doesn't hang with check, I can even go here, giving the rook, and after this I just take the pawn. And here if he moves the rook, I don't know, somewhere, for example here, I can even come here. And in fact black is just winning. Rook e1 is better, but here I'm also a pawn up. So even though the computers are indicating that the position is just completely lost here to what I did, I mean it's enough with such a natural move as b3 to, oh sorry, b3 to be worse with white again. But of course, I mean he's after all the world champion Magnus, so he doesn't fall for such cheap tricks. And what he did here, he was actually quite impressive, I thought. He went queen g3, just giving me this pawn for free, and just rook d1. And the idea is that with the rook on d1, the king is quite safe on e1, so that in the next move he can take here. And the main problem for black is not, again, that I'm an exchange down, but it's this king on d8. I cannot go to c7, and I can also not play d6 because it's pinned, so you can just take it. And when I can't get out with the king, I mean I will be mated sooner or later, like rook takes g2, move the queen, and then rook g8. Okay, I didn't see anything better than taking this pawn. Now after rook takes g2, maybe I can play some queen e4. King moves, and now maybe even some move like b6 and bishop a6, I think. Or even knight e5 as well. But of course he doesn't allow me to give this check on e4. He played a very strong move, bishop d5. And we can see that even though in such a random position with so many strange things going on, white is actually having very nice harmony with his pieces. Like the rook is very active here. After the pawn here disappears, this rook will have an open file here. The bishop is very strong towards my king, and also the queen stops me from getting out. So in fact, even though it looks like the pieces are just randomly spread on the board, white is having a very, very harmonious position, which is also why he's completely winning here, because the same cannot really be said for my pieces. I mean, they're not doing anything at all, more or less. I went queen f5. Took the pawn, bishop f4. And again, he can, if he wants to, he can try to give me a check and see what, I mean, something like this, or it's possible. But what he does is much more in keeping with his style and what he has done so far in the game. He has centralized the queen even more without actually having anything concrete in mind. He's just like pulling his pieces together in a very nice way. Now I played king c7. Actually, I don't really have other moves. For example, if knight e5, he can just trade queens with queen e4. And still, in the ending, I have the same problems. I cannot go d6, it's still pinned. And if I move the king, he can just take the pawn. And if I am to play something slower like b6, he can just deliver. Actually, the rook is also hanging, but he can also just, I mean, give check and take the pawn. So here, I don't really have a way to continue fighting. So I decided to play king c7, trying to keep the queens on the board for a bit more. Rook g5, threatening the queen. Queen f8. And now bishop g3 is very natural, because both there's a pin here and there is a pin here. But I had one last trick actually that I was trying to make use of. I went e5, and now it looks like white can win the game immediately by taking on c6. And if I take back, he takes here. and due to the pin, I'm just losing the bishop on f4. But after bishop takes c6, I had planned this strong intermediate move, queen e7. Now the rook is hanging, and if he takes, I take with check. And the next move I can take the rook. The only problem being that if he just moves the rook, I'm still completely lost. So it doesn't doesn't matter so much. For example, I take and he goes queen e4, and I mean all my problems remain. I'm still pinned. He will take here next move, and it's kind of a difficult situation when you're facing the world champion. You're in sight knot, and your only trick is completely losing for you, even if he falls for it. But what to do? I mean, you have to somehow try. He went here immediately instead, and yeah, the rest is not that interesting because he will take here. I still cannot develop at all, and I'm an exchange down, and yeah, so it's just basically game over. I continued for a bit trying to activate the rook, but okay, it's just game over. Now white structure is even better, and okay, the rest is really not that interesting. Here, I mean, it's very simple. The pawns promotes, and yeah, I played a few more moves, and then I decided to resign. So the critical points of the game, I think the first critical point is maybe here, that this knight f6 move is really really dubious, but at least that was a calculated risk. Next critical point is, I mean, for him it's probably when he decides to sacrifice here, but it's also very natural. But here this h5 is, I think, the main area of discussion for the game, and it's actually, in fact, very fascinating. Even with the help of very strong engines, it's difficult or almost impossible to find out what is going on here. Actually, if white is better, if white does have enough compensation, or if he's even slightly worse. But it's, with that being said, I mean, we're not playing correspondence, and over the board it's, I think, a very interesting position to play for both sides. Probably, I mean, for white it's a bit easier, practically speaking, but black is definitely not without chances. And I mean, if he managed to get out, he will be winning, so the onus is in some sense on white. But after this knight a5, it seems like, yeah, already. I mean, it might seem a bit early to say that by move 12 I'm completely lost, but when you dig a bit deeper and analyze the position, it turns out to be true, in fact. So f7, yeah, and yeah, the rest is perhaps still interesting, but from the objective point of view, it's already too late for black. So I think that's about it for this game. If someone has any questions. Huh? Yeah, okay. Any questions?
How was the feeling to have the world champion on the other side of the board?
How the feeling of playing the world champion is? No, it's interesting, of course, but I think, in fact, when you sit down at the board, it's already, I mean, you have the position. You're only thinking about position. I'm looking, I mean, towards where the board ends, and that's it. I mean, who is sitting there, it doesn't matter. I'm just playing chess. But of course, when preparing for the game and also when analyzing with him afterwards, it's clear. I mean, how much he knows and how strong he really is. It was really impressive, actually, what he saw during the game and so on. But when actually playing, for me, it doesn't matter at all. Yes.
You said that you wanted to avoid the variation with bishop d5, but then you said that after knight f6, knight c3, d6, you would avoid it, but you can still play bishop d5, right?
Yes, it's true that I said that I wanted to avoid bishop b5, but it exists here, but it's not really the same position because now the knight is here. So if I play d6 here, check, bishop d7, he can, for example, put the pawn here and try to create a big center, and he can also play c4. So I didn't stop bishop b5 completely, but I stopped the most dangerous versions of it. Let's say. Yes.
Did you calculate a lot of different variation of knight c3? How many different variations do you have? Yeah,
Sorry.
I think he played with what's the same variation against Adam?
Yeah. No,
He played knight c3.
no, after knight c3, my intention for the game was to go d6, not d5, which I played against Adams. So, but it's the first time that I faced e5. I mean,
Yeah, because there's some variation with e6 instead of knight c3.
yeah. Here, I mean, you have the option of d5. You have the option of actually e6, which could transpose to e6 on the fourth move instead, which I'm not a big expert, but I think it's considered quite good for white. But as said, I mean, for this game, it was d6 on that was the idea.
Okay. I have one more question.
Yes.
What do you feel about split boxing? What's your view of that?
Of the confession booth.
Question.
No, in fact, I didn't go there into the confession booth even once during the tournament, because in most of the games I was already in time trouble, and to waste a few additional minutes on talking about the game didn't seem like a very smart idea. But I played with it before in the qualifier tournament, and then I went there a couple of times, and I think the idea is quite nice. I mean that the idea is that you anytime during the game when your opponent is thinking, you go out to this confession booth and you say a couple of sentences about how you feel about the game, how it's going, or whatever's on your mind. No, I think it's nice, but it's also, I mean, when you're so focused on the game, it's a bit strange to go out there and speak about it suddenly, and you're used to being quiet. But I think for the idea in general, for the interest of chess, is very nice, and I think that they should have it more often.
We have one last question here in the audience.
Yes.
When you prepare this kind of games against this kind of players,
Yes.
you go really very, very deep in the calculations, the variations, or you only select, let's say, a kind of style of playing and then go for that? How deep is the preparation?
Yeah, it depends. My form of preparation for the games, it depends a little bit on what kind of position that I'm aiming for. If I'm aiming for a very sharp position, then I have to be a bit more concrete. I have to analyze a bit deeper to make sure that it's not bad, or to make sure that it's good, because the value of each move is very high. If I play some very sharp Sicilian, for example, but if I'm playing something that is a bit slower in style, where you have a lot of options, like let's say some Queen's Gambit or some Spanish, some more classical kind of position, then I'm not going very deep. More I'm looking at good games to get inspiration and find some ideas, and then over the board I will find out the details of exactly when to play what and so on, because it's not really. I mean, the value of each move is not that high. It's not so important to know it concretely. So it depends on the kind of position I'm aiming for. Sure. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks.
Big encounter. Nils will be here during the day in commentating the game.